But we're starting first with some breaking news coming in on the India-Canada crisis. Just days after, the Financial Times reported that India had ordered 41 Canadian diplomats to leave the country by October the 10th. Now the situation has escalated with a first formal word from the Indian government on that piece of information. The External Affairs Ministry has just commented and said that India has asked Canada to trim its diplomatic staff, and there is a continued interference in our internal affairs. India is raising the temperatures on this issue once again. This was triggered by Canada, and now India has once again repeated what it said on September the 21st to say that India seeks parity. So you can go ahead and assume that there will be a reduction in the staff of the Canadian High Commission and consulates here in India. The number of diplomats needs to be the same that India enjoys in Canada. Right now, Canada has a far larger number, and therefore India has asked Canada to remove at least 41 diplomats, is what the Financial Times has been reporting. Now the External Affairs Ministry says, we've sought parity, so you better assume that there will be a reduction. Here's Arindam Bagchi, External Affairs Ministry spokesperson.
Insofar as discussions on parity, as we mentioned earlier, given the much higher diplomatic presence of Canadian diplomats or diplomatic presence here in Canada and their continuing interference in our internal affairs, we have sought parity in our respective diplomatic presence. Discussions are ongoing on the modalities of achieving this. Canadian diplomatic presence is very much higher. We would assume that there would be a reduction.
Gaurav Sawant is with me, been tracking the story closely. Gaurav, continued interference in our internal affairs. Arindam Bagchi doesn't go into the specific numbers that were mentioned in that Financial Times report, but he doesn't deny it either. This appears to be, by all respects, a confirmation that India has basically put its foot down and said parity is a must, and Canada needs to remove a certain number of diplomats to bring that parity.
Shiv, you're absolutely right. In fact, in his first conference also, Arindam Bagchi, the spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs, had said that India had sought parity not just in numbers but also in seniority, which means one, same number of diplomats, two, equal seniority diplomats. So, Canada has much larger numbers, and much larger numbers, by some accounts more than 3 times the number of diplomats that India has in Canada. Canada also has a larger number of consulates in India. They have one, apart from their High Commission in the national capital, they have missions in Mumbai, in Chandigarh and in Bengaluru. So one more when it comes to India, we have our High Commission at Ottawa, and we have 2 other missions, our consulates in Vancouver and Toronto. So India sought parity. Does this indicate that Canada will either have to shut down one consulate or trim numbers, and trim numbers drastically? And this is something that Canada does not want to do. But Shiv, as you very rightly pointed out, the devil is in the detail. What was the terminology used by Arindam Bagchi? He said Canada's continuing interference in our internal affairs, and this is something that India is not taking to very kindly. The activities, the interference, whether it was the farmers' protest or a number of other instances that India has well documented in the past, and this is being taken up with Canada very seriously. While there is some effort from the Canadian side to dial down pressure and tensions and talk about quiet diplomacy, but is that really possible after those, as Government of India puts it, baseless and absurd allegations levelled by Justin Trudeau on the floor of the House in Canada, where he said there was a possible, allegation of a potential link between agents of India and the killing of that Canadian terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So India is not taking this lying down. India wants parity in numbers and seniority in terms of Canada stripping or trimming its mission in India.
This is actually incredible, Gaurav, because this comes a couple of days after the Foreign Minister of Canada had said we want quiet diplomacy, we want to have private discussions with India. After 15 days of the most public kind of mudslinging and campaign against India, there was nothing diplomatic about that. But 2 days ago, suddenly Trudeau deploys his Foreign Minister Melanie Joly to say that we should have private discussions on this entire matter. But it's interesting, Gaurav, that Arindam Bagchi's words today come right after Canada appears to have climbed down, which is an indication in itself that India thinks, you've done this whole thing in public, we're not going to sit and have a quiet discussion with you right now. We've already decided about parity, you had better implement it. This is India showing its resolve, Gaurav.
Oh, absolutely, Shiv. India is showing resolve, and this is something that the West is actually seeing. So, you know, the West can no longer think that it can talk down to India and not present evidence, but just talk about credible allegations. Again, Shiv, on the basis of what? Things that are being asked in Canada even today. Where is the evidence? Where is the investigation? Who are the suspects? Who are the accused? What is it that the RCMP has been able to find out? None of this. So no smoking gun evidence, no investigation, no suspects, and India has been blamed already on the basis of intelligence inputs. What are these intelligence inputs? Those documents aren't being shared with India, just some verbal communication according to Canadian media. Is that how diplomacy is handled between two countries? So this is something that India hasn't taken very kindly to. Again, Shiv, this is something where America also has been speaking while they're asking India to cooperate. The Canadian media is also reporting that America is asking Canada to carry out free, fair and transparent investigation in this case for truth to come out. So very clearly, even the Five Eyes partners are hedging their bets on this one, because India will not take this lying down. All these allegations, especially at a time when Canada is defending a terrorist. Hardeep Singh Nijjar was an armed terrorist, and this is a known fact. There's an Interpol Red Corner notice against him. 2014, 2016, India's repeatedly given dossiers to Canada, and they've taken no action. So very clearly, Canada needs to clean up its act first before coming here and, virtually pontificating, which India said will not do.
The signaling here from India is, I don't think we've seen something like this in the recent past. This is India basically saying, you wanted to raise the temperatures, we've raised the temperatures. Now you want to cool things down? Well, we're not really in the mood to do that yet. Of course, we'll do diplomacy. We'll talk. Everybody wants peaceful relations between two democracies especially. But now that you've triggered this entire situation, now that you've brought the Khalistan issue onto the table, let's talk about it. Let's work around it. Let's first of all bring parity to our two high commissions. Now that the entire world has seen the allegations that you have made, you're not going to browbeat us into a closed-door meeting. We're going to do this in public. And before we talk about it, this is India reading the Riot Act in many ways to Canada and saying, until you get your 41 diplomats or whatever that number is out of the country, this is not going to become a normal relationship. Continued interference in our internal affairs is a very serious charge that is being leveled officially by the Indian government against the Canadian government. So we're going to have to wait and see. And remember, the timeline, the deadline actually is October the 10th as per that Financial Times report. Arindam Bagchi, I'm going to play out for you once again what he said, the External Affairs Ministry spokesperson. He doesn't talk dates or numbers, but here's what he said.
Insofar as discussions on parity, as we mentioned earlier, given the much higher diplomatic presence of Canadian diplomats or diplomatic presence here in Canada and their continuing interference in our internal affairs, we had and we have sought parity in our respective diplomatic presence. Discussions are ongoing on the modalities of achieving this. Canadian diplomatic presence is very much higher. We would assume that there would be a reduction